The Pelicans hold the 7th pick, but draft night trades could change everything. Here's how New Orleans could reshape their future by trading down or back into the draft. It's Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Friday here, and we are going to be talking all things NBA draft, trading down, trading back into the first round. I've got some trades for you, teams to target, players to target to, all of that. Plus, we're going to talk a little bit about Joe Dumars in the third segment of today's show. So thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know if you're an everydayer in the comments down below. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right. We get to talk draft. We get to talk trades. Two trades. I can't speak today. Two of our favorite subjects to cover here over at Locked On Pelicans. So this is considered a pretty good and deep draft. Next year's draft is considered maybe slightly better too, but just as good as this one. So what if there's a way to trade down? You're kind of doing a value play. Trade down, acquire maybe future draft assets while still getting a player that you are targeting and that you want. That seems like a pretty smart move, especially for a small market team like the New Orleans Pelicans to do. What if there's a way to get another pick in this draft without giving up too much in next year's draft too? We're going to talk about all of that in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So this is kind of about maximizing value. And this is something we're going to talk about in the future here on the show, where, you've got to trust your scouting and guys that, believe in the work that you're doing as an organization. If there's a guy that you want and he available at 7, yeah, you could draft him at 7, but maybe you can trade back and get that guy. You can also stay at 7 and just draft the guy you want, even if it's a little bit higher than what it is. There's something to be said for just going and getting your player, getting your guy, which is something the everydayers know I kind of long believe in. Trust your scouting, go and get the guy you want. Got to overpay even a slight bit, that can be worth it. But if you're doing the value play and acquiring future draft assets or additional draft assets in this draft, I think that could be pretty valuable. I think there is a spot between, say, 14 to 24, somewhere in that range, where there's a lot of value to be had, and that can be worth it. And given that this is considered a pretty good draft, this is the type of draft where, and I've heard a couple people around the league say this, like, you might get more than normal by trading down in the draft. So let's go over a couple of picks, two trades here that I think you could look at by trading down and who the Pelicans might be targeting there. So the first one, and this is a team we'll talk about a little bit later too, is the Brooklyn Nets. They have tons of first-round picks in this draft. I think they have 1, 2, 3. They have 4 first-round picks in this draft. They might have an additional one that I'm just forgetting about too. That's a lot. Like, you don't need 4 rookies, right? So this is a way for them to try and consolidate a little bit by trading up. So Brooklyn gets the 7th overall pick. The Pelicans get 19, 26, and a future first-round pick. We can figure that out a little bit later, but future draft capital. So the Pelicans go from 7th to 19, but also acquire the 26 overall pick. You're falling kind of far in this draft, and that does worry me a little bit because, the next one we're going to look at has the Pelicans dropping to 12. This has you dropping 12 spots, not just 5 spots. That's a lot. But if you get the 19th and 26th pick, I think you're in a good position to get guys that you would want, right? At 19 in our Locked On NBA mock draft, there went Nolan Traore, but Maxime Reynaud, who we're going to talk a lot about in this show, went at 20 in our mock draft, right? Colin Murray-Boyles went 22 in our mock draft. Jace Richardson, 23. Thomas Sorber, 24. Those are all players that I think would fit really well in New Orleans that could do really, really good, right? Even someone like Kasparas Jakučionis, I think could be had potentially at 19. So making this pick is a little bit of a risk, but if you can pick up a guard and a big and kind of solidify some of your future there, guys that you know will be starters for you, even if they're not the number one guy while you're still building around Zion Williamson, I think that works, right? If you can get Maxime Reynaud, a big that kind of does it all, can stretch the court, can be at times a shot blocker, if not elite, that's useful to put next to Zion Williamson. If you can get Jace Richardson, someone who can be, a combo guard for you while also giving you really good defense on the perimeter and ease some of the burden on Herb Jones, that's appealing to me. I mean, if Jakučionis is there, that's your point guard of the future, right? If Yegor Demin is there, that's your point guard of the future, along with a versatile big. Those two are going to help you then compete this coming season around Zion Williamson. You're also not going to be asking them to do more than they should be doing. That's a way to succeed as a rookie, build a lot of confidence, and build a good foundation going forward. But this is risky, right? 19 and 26 is definitely risky here, I think, for New Orleans to drop that far from 7 overall. And you're kind of missing out on the third tier of prospects, which is what you're going to get in the 7th pick. Those are the guys in the range of the 7th pick. You drop a little bit further. Good players, but definitely don't have some of the upside of some of the guys that you could be looking at 7 overall. But that future first, depending on what Brooklyn ends up doing, they're not going to be great next year or for the next 2 years. I don't see them being like a big free agent trade team or anything like that. So I think, that future pick you get, it might depend on what that is. Another trade, though, that I see the Pelicans potentially doing that I see, look, that makes sense for Brooklyn to get up and try and get a guy that they want to consolidate their picks a little bit. A team that I also think could be interested in trading up could be the Chicago Bulls at 12th overall. So here's the trade. Chicago gets the 7th overall pick and CJ McCollum. The Pelicans get 12, Kevin Huerter, Kobe White, and throw in a second round pick or two in there in some capacity to balance the trade a little bit more. The Pelicans dropped 5 spots at a point guard in Kobe White that, maybe had his best season, but, is that a guy you want to pay a ton of money for in the future? I don't really know. Does Chicago want to do that? What's their direction in the first place? I'm not really sure, and he's on an expiring deal, so he's up for a new contract. Kevin Huerter's quality guy that could come off the bench for you. And Chicago goes and gets the cornerstone piece, hopefully for them, that they're missing here. At 12 in our mock draft, Cedric Coward of Washington State went. He's been rising up draft boards, but available was also Derek Queen, Asa Newell, Yegor Demin, right? Those are the type, Reynaud was there, some of the names we've already thrown out there are all available there. If you're a Derek Queen believer, that's a great value pick. Maybe you like Asa Newell out of Georgia. He's going to probably be the best shot blocker in this draft. He's got some comps to Naz Reid. Maybe that's the type of big that the Pelicans need. You need versatile bigs and different big men to put out in the NBA playoffs if you want to win games. We've seen that especially this season. So you trade down, you get some depth that the Pelicans are lacking a little bit here. You acquire some more second-round picks. That's something the Pelicans are massively lacking, and you've seen second-round picks become far more valuable the past 2 years, and the Pelicans have traded them all away, basically, to dump bad contracts. So this replenishes that a little bit, keeps you in kind of the same tier of the draft, and you can still kind of get the player, potentially, that you want, right? Jakučionis could be available there. We don't exactly know what's going to happen with Cayman Malawach. He might be available there too, so he gets you a big man of the future. I think that's an option for New Orleans to also shed some salary and, give them some more breathing room to the luxury tax, to that first apron. If you are an everydayer and you've heard me talk about, the position that the Pelicans are in with the salary cap, go listen to that show if you haven't. This is something that they've got to be thinking about as well. Do you like either of those two trades? I don't love them. I don't love the Brooklyn one as much. I don't hate the Chicago one, but I wouldn't say that I love it either, truthfully. But those are two that I could see happening. What's maybe more realistic is straight up trading back into the first round, drafting someone at 7, then trading back into the first round. I got a couple of deals. Let's talk about that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. We got the NBA Finals going on. Game 1 last night. Look, every game is going to deliver highlight-worthy performances, momentum shifts, can't miss moments. So whether it's a game winner or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Look, if you want to get into the player props of who's going to kind of lead their team to glory, you can take Tyrese Halliburton for more than 11.5 assists. You can take Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for more than 29.5 points. You can even put those two together for a same-game parlay and get a bigger win. And think about $200 in bonus bets. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. For your second listen today, it's got to be the Locked On NBA Big Board show, right? That's the big board that I'm using when it comes to ranking prospects here because I just believe in Rafael Barlow, our NBA draft expert. He's reacting to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, so I don't love the trade down options for the New Orleans Pelicans there. I think there's going to be some that are going to be available. And I think it needs to be a good deal to do it, right? If you can get 2 first-round picks plus an additional first-round pick, so essentially you turn 7 into 3 first-round picks, like that Brooklyn trade, like you can convince me of that. You know, trading back 5 spots to still kind of get one of the guys that you want while adding depth and other draft capital, even if they're second-round picks. And second-round picks are important. Maybe we need to do a whole show on that. Yeah, I think that could be a really useful thing to do. But maybe the Pelicans want to be aggressive. And I kind of love that idea here. There's something to be said, as I mentioned earlier in the show, and I've said before here on Locked On Pelicans, go and get your man. There's a guy you like. There's a guy that you think is going to be a difference maker for you. Go and get him. Whether it's in the draft, whether it's in a trade, free agency, whatever it is, acquire the guy. Don't give up the farm for him. But if you got to overpay a little bit to get someone that you believe in, go and do it. Trust your scouting, trust your front office work. That's what teams need to be doing. And Joe Dumars strikes me as the type of guy that is very decisive in what he believes in with the work being done. So I would not be shocked if that's something that they would potentially look to do. And this draft, where there's multiple teams that have multiple first-round picks that can't really use all those guys and don't need to be the Brooklyn Nets don't need to be making 4 first-round picks. The Oklahoma City Thunder, who are in the NBA Finals, right? As we speak, they have the 14th pick. They also have, I think it's the 24th pick. They don't need 2 rookies on that team. They're not even expensive yet, right? They don't need that. The Orlando Magic have 2 first-round picks. They're facing a weird situation with their salary cap too. Look, even Boston, doesn't necessarily need to add salary to it, though they might need to add a player given what's kind of going on. So there's potential, I think, to trade back into the first round. So the plan here would be draft someone at 7. We don't know who it's going to be just yet, but then you trade back in and acquire another player that you really like. If you take Jeremiah Fears or Trey Johnson at 7, trade back in and try and get Maxime Reynaud. Trade back in and try and get Colin Murray-Boyles. Trade back in and get Thomas Sorber, who I think could be a good big man to get later in this draft, right? His NBA comp is like Yusuf Nurkic or Jonas Valanciunas. Could probably use one of those guys right about now. So you can go and get some of those. You could potentially trade back in and get Asa Newell from Georgia, and I think that could be a really useful player. Or if someone like Yegor Demin, who is rising up draft boards, but maybe just doesn't go high for whatever reason, or someone like Yakachonis doesn't, you can get that guy a little bit later. If you realize, hey, this is how the draft is shaking out, at 7, take a big man and Cayman Malawach, right? And then get a guard later. Or just get a wing. You can never have enough good wings at the NBA level. So let's look at a couple of trades here. I want to start with what I think could be one of the more interesting ones, and that is the Orlando Magic. I think they could be interested in CJ McCollum. I think they would have been more interested in CJ McCollum last offseason, but I do feel like you can get a deal done here. They have the 16th pick and the 25th pick. One of those, I don't know which one, would need to be included. Obviously, you're trying for 16, but I'm not sure. So the deal would be something like CJ McCollum for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Gary Harris, he's got to pick up his player option for this, and Caleb Houston for 16. So they get CJ. The Pelicans get 16, KCP, Gary Harris, and Caleb Houston. Normally you might need to attach like the future Indiana pick, and that's going to be a theme of this here, to get this done. It could be worth it, I think, especially if it's 16. That Indiana pick next year is not going to be in the top 16. It's going to be worse, right? So maybe you need to include that there for the 16th pick. For the 25th pick, I don't think you would need to do that. They've got some long-term money issues there in Orlando. CJ at least helps you this season. It is an expiring deal and can provide salary cap relief for you in a way that KCP, Gary Harris, and those others really can't. And then adding 16 adds more long-term salary to that, right? At 16 overall in our Locked On NBA mock draft was Rasheer Fleming from St. Joe's, but you also, again, have Maxine Reynaud available. Thomas Sorber available, right? Those are the type of guys that I think you really would be targeting there. Jace Richardson, as we've mentioned, is available there too. Maybe you like Ben Seraf, right? If you want to go with that. Maybe you just want Walter Clayton Jr., who just led Florida to the title. Those are, interesting players at around that thing. But look, Asa Newell went 14. Demin went 15. If you get the 16th pick, you're right in the range of those type of guys. And all of a sudden now, the Pelicans roster is built still around Zion Williamson. We covered that yesterday. But also now adding pieces for the future that maybe the Zion experiment face plants again. And okay, whatever, cool. We're building around the 7th pick, the 16th pick, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones going forward. And Yves Missi there too. That's a solid core to start building around, and you haven't really given up your biggest draft asset, which is going to be the Pelicans' own first-round pick next year. In this draft, if these teams are desperate to try and get out of the first round because you just don't need a rookie right now, you can kick the can down the road if you're them. And that's where that Indiana pick that the Pelicans own from the Brandon Ingram trade could be really useful. You could attach that with someone like Jose Alvarado, and I think it could end up being fine to do that. It's a little bit of sweetener to get a deal done. So that's a way that you could try and jump up a little bit, right, and trade back in. Brooklyn needs to consolidate. Would they trade the 19th pick for that Indiana pick next year? That way they at least only draft 3 rookies. That could be a way that you do it, right? The Thunder have 15 and 24. You could easily use that Indiana pick to get 24. You could easily also use that Indiana pick to get 26 from Brooklyn too, right? I think that's a no-brainer. You don't even need to include players in this sort of thing. The Thunder at 15, you might need to include something else for them to take that Indiana pick next year, since it's not going to be better than 15, and the Thunder will get expensive soon. So will Indiana too, which maybe makes that Indiana pick look interesting if they start losing guys. But that's kind of what you're looking at here. Another team to keep an eye on is the Utah Jazz at 21. They have the 5th pick. They have a ton of rookies. They had 3 first-round picks last year. Could you trade back up and get the 21st overall pick? I think you probably could. They don't need another rookie on the team right now. That gives them a future pick to do whatever with, right? That can be, I think, very useful. And that Indiana pick doesn't look like it's going to be great next year, given that the Pacers are in the finals now. So get rid of it, take advantage of a deep draft, and get a guy that you want. Or do a bigger deal with Orlando. That's an option too. So coming up next, Well, let's keep looking at this. Actually, I'm not ready to switch gears just yet, right? If you can walk away from this draft with a future guard or wing and a future big man, I think that's a great position to be in for New Orleans. You're hedging your bets a little bit. I don't love 2 timelines, right? That didn't work for the Warriors. I don't know how that's going to go for the Dallas Mavericks, who are now on 2 timelines as well. But anytime you hear 2 timelines on a team, like, run away from it. It doesn't work. So I don't exactly want to put the Pelicans on a 2 timeline plan. But right now, I'm just not exactly believing in Zion Williamson. I don't care if look, if they trade him or don't, I don't want him gone. It just, given the recent history, I don't know what I think. And, we talked about it yesterday. They're building around him. It's the fact. We'll see how it goes. Maybe Joe Dumars reaches him. There was someone in the comments on YouTube who made a very good point, right? Like, Joe Dumars is not David Griffin. That can help. That can help connect, right? And that matters. I agree with you. I completely understand what that comment was saying. But again, he's got people that he could have listened to before that weren't David Griffin, and he hasn't. So I am skeptical. Just the injury history, that alone makes me skeptical, right? We'll see. We've been here before. But you need to start kind of building that, plan B, emergency plan, probably plan C at this point when it comes to it. That's an important thing for the Pelicans to do. They need to start thinking a little bit more long-term than the short-term that they've been looking at trying to build around Zion Williamson. Now, if it succeeds, that's great. And you still have young guys, and you can either trade them away for other players later down the line. But then if Zion doesn't work out and you trade him, waive him, whatever it might be, you at least have a bunch of those young guys in the building, and it doesn't feel like you're starting at 0 for your rebuild. You'll be 1 year ahead of it. I like building that insurance in, that plan B, that plan C, that insurance into the way that the team could operate right now. And I think that could be really useful for this team. Look, I hope Zion plays better. I've had people say, I even did the show of like, Zion played more than you think last year, even though he didn't, but he could have. But it went from 70-something games to 50-something games, even in the best case scenario, right? That's still a drop. It's better than what it was a couple of years ago, certainly, but that's still a drop and not great. They need to kind of figure this out and get it sorted, or they need to move on, and at least you want to not be starting from ground 0. That's why maybe it's worth getting rid of that Indiana pick. Not the Pelicans' own pick next year, but the Indiana pick could be worth it. So coming up next, let's look at some of the things Joe Dumars has said recently that I really like. He's doing a media tour. Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tyler Shook, Spencer Rattler, who's winning the QB battle, who's going to be the starter for the Black and Gold next year. Ross Jackson over the Locked On Saints podcast is figuring it all out for you. Make him your second listen today. All right. Joe Dumars is doing a press tour with the local news here, and I've seen some of the clips going around. I can't wait to watch all of this stuff, and we'll break this down more a little bit next week. Something that immediately jumped out at me. That dude is a straight shooter. He is a straight talker. And I dig it, right? Normally when you fire someone, you kind of go the exact opposite direction of that, right? You ever seen like a buddy, a friend who breaks up with their partner and all of a sudden, is this like a clean cut person. Now they're dating someone with like tons of tattoos or whatever, even if it's just for a little bit. It's like kind of that idea, right? You just go the complete opposite direction here. Joe Dumars is a straight talker, and you're seeing that from him in these interviews. And he said something that I found kind of interesting that I both like and does worry me a little bit, right? He said he wants this team to play hard, go out and compete, basically have toughness to them, some grit. They've been lacking that. I agree. We've talked about that. That is certainly the traits that Joe Dumars is really looking for. Cares less about how you play and all that, and more, as he said in his introductory press conference, like, I want to know the person and how they think, their mentality. And I dig that approach from him. He's like, basically said, like, as long as we win and win by playing hard, I don't care what we do, whether we take a ton of threes, whether it's something else. He's basically looking at results over process. And I have been saying, the everydayers know this whole season, at a certain point, while I'm a big process over results person, the results do have to matter because that's what you're judged on at the NBA level. Whether you win pretty or not pretty, as long as you win, that's ultimately the most important thing. Now, it might not be sustainable, but you're just looking to simply win. That's what you're trying to do here. Joe Dumars looks like he's going to build a team that just finds a way to win. And if they win, that's great. He doesn't care how. He just wants them to compete and play hard and feels good results will come from that. He said, I don't care if you win by shooting 43s or not, right? There's something to be said for that, especially on a Zion Williamson-led team that's just never going to take a ton of threes. So, all right, I'm kind of on board with this a little bit, I think. And I kind of love that idea when it comes down to it. So, I like this. I hope that this is something that, he can kind of build into the team and that they can really try and do and win with. But it also gives you an idea of players that maybe kind of like fit how he views things and what he's looking for. And I think that's important. That's going to apply to the draft. That's going to apply to free agency too. If you're not kind of tough, is that the type of player that he's going to be looking to add to this team? Are you a hustle guy or not? Right? Derek Queen's probably not really a hustle guy in my opinion. So they're probably not going to look to go and get him. Gives you an insight into Joe Dumars that we haven't seen before or spelled out a little bit more. And I really like that. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back with y'all on Monday. We got more draft, free agency, Zion and Joe Dumars to talk about.